This is our topic 2 in our second unit in Bio 20, and it's on mechanisms of population change. So these are the things that by the end of this section you should know is explain the variations that result from heritable mutations that have selective advantage, discuss the importance of sexual reproduction with regards to individual variation and evolution, compare Lamarckian and Darwinian explanations of evolutionary change, use evidence to explain the evolution of modern species from ancestral forms, and then describe modern evolutionary theories like punctuated equilibrium and gradualism. Okay, so it's a lot of stuff, and you might not really understand any of it right now, but we will get to it as we go through this section. So variations, it says in all organisms, visible differences may be observed. These differences are known as variations. So if we look at different species, they're obviously going to look different because they have variations. Even within a species, you're going to find variations. Things look different. Look at humans, wide range of differences. We all have those different visible variations. Variations obviously occur between species. So there's over 8.7 million different species on Earth that we know of today, and the majority of which are plants, insects, and microorganisms. Nearly 10,000 new species are discovered each year. So lots of differences within or between different species. But like what I was saying, there's lots of variations that occur within each species as well, and that's intra-specific variation. So this is all the same species. These are all dogs, but they all have way different looks and lots of different variations, basically. So why does such variations exist? Well, variation within a species is largely the result of sexual reproduction. So in order to create differences, we need to have those genes coming together from two parents. So we know that if we breed a chocolate lab with a chihuahua, then we're not going to come out with a dog that looks like a greyhound, right? So we know that sexual reproduction is what is going to give us certain traits. And that's basically why things look different. In sexual reproduction, offspring inherit 50% of their DNA from each parent, and this results in a new combination of genes and therefore new characteristics. Variations that give an individual a better chance of surviving to reproduce will be passed on to offspring. Through generations, this variation will become more and more common in a particular population. Such variations are referred to as adaptations. So we have variations within our genes, but adaptations that exist are basically due to the fact that if you have a certain trait that helps you to survive, then you're likely going to pass that trait on to your offspring, your children. And then after generation and generation, most of the population might have this certain trait if it's something that'll help you to survive. So how does variation arise in the first place? Well, how do we have differences? The reason why is mutations. So basically a random mutation could happen where your genes messed up maybe in the process of creating the DNA inside of you. And in doing that, basically, if that mutation helps that species to survive, then they would pass that on to the next generation. So that's how they get added into the population, those mutations. It says, in order to reproduce, DNA within the nucleus of a cell must first replicate and divide. The process of DNA replication is not perfect. Mistakes are often made. Small changes in the genetic code are referred to as mutations and result in changes in gene expression. Mutations are thus another cause of variation. So if we have an original, this is showing you an example. If this was the original sequence at the top here, a mutation that might happen is this one is supposed to be a T, but it put it as a C. And just by changing that one part of the DNA, that can cause a big difference. And in this case, they're saying that it changed the color of someone's eyes. So let's say everyone always had brown eyes, and then all of a sudden this mutation happened and blue eyes got added to the population. Then this person has kids and they give their blue eyes and so on. So it can just be added to the population by accident, and then it could be basically take over the population if it's something that is dominant or something that is helping the species to survive. While some mutations lead to beneficial variations, others can be harmful or even benign. So, like I just said, when you think of mutations, you normally think of bad things. And we'll talk about some of those. But there's also ones that are benign, and benign basically means it doesn't necessarily harm anyone. It's just sort of a mutation. So on the left-hand side here, it says, in humans, color blindness is the cause by a mutation of a gene encoding the development of cones in the retinas of your eyes. While this mutation offers no advantage in terms of survival, it's also not harmful in really any way. So people who are colorblind, yeah, it's a mutation, but again, not necessarily the worst thing in the world, not necessarily the best. There's not really it's benign is what we're saying. On the right-hand side here, sickle cell anemia. This would be a harmful mutation. This happens when your red blood cells basically get deformed, and you see this would be a regular red blood cell. This would be a sickle cell red blood cell. Sickle cells cannot carry oxygen and often become clogged in your arteries and veins, and individuals with sickle cell anemia often do not survive past adulthood. So just having that mutation can cause you to not be able to live like a full life. So they could be good, they could be bad, they could be neutral like colorblindness. I would still say colorblindness, I guess. If you were someone who had to live in the wild or something, maybe seeing certain colors could help you. It could be a bad thing, but generally doesn't really affect you. So natural selection is one mechanism by which evolution or changes in the population occur. Through natural selection, traits that increase an organism's chance of survival to reproduce or reproductive age are more likely to be passed on to future generations. As a result, these traits become more common in a population, causing that population to change over time. However, it is important to note that whether or not a particular trait is selected for or selected against depends entirely on the organism's environment at that moment in time. Thus, changes in the various traits of a given population are driven by environmental change. So, basically, what it's saying here is that if your mutation helps you to live to be reproductive age and pass your genes on to the next generation, then that's basically natural selection. Your mutation has helped you to survive. So it says it's important to note that whether or not a particular trait is selected for or against depends on the environment. So certain environments could lead to certain traits over others. An example might be in this picture where maybe it's better for this rat, I don't know, it's not a rat, like a shrew or something, to be brown in the first environment, and then if this darker colored one was to live in the dark or the lighter environment, it might not be quite as good, but depending on the environment, the color of their fur could have an effect on if they're camouflaged from their prey. So definitely something to consider their environment. So maybe you have a great trait that helps you to survive, but you have to be in the right environment to allow that to help you. So any sort of trait that helps you to survive, regardless of anything, is considered natural selection. It says natural selection at work, so sickle cell anemia and malaria in Africa. It says in Africa, a leading cause of illness and death is malaria. Malaria is spread by mosquitoes, which contaminate a person's blood with the disease when they bite. Interestingly, however, individuals afflicted with sickle cell anemia have a much higher probability of surviving malaria because their misshapen red blood cells are unable to carry the disease. So as a result, the sickle cell mutation is actually selected for in the area of the world rather than against. So what it's saying here is that if you have sickle cell anemia, it can protect you from malaria. And malaria kills people. So it's a better chance of survival if you have sickle cell anemia. So that's why people tend to, it's living in the population, it's being passed on because the sickle cell anemia allows them to survive, at least to reproductive age. So it says sickle cell anemia is therefore more common in areas with high frequency of malaria. If you look at the map of Africa, generally look at the area with sickle cell versus malaria, that's they sort of go hand in hand. So there's definitely a bigger area that has malaria, but generally that sickle cell area, the part where that has a bunch of sickle cell, is also related to where malaria is. Another example of natural selection is in skin color. So humans need sunlight to survive, and as it permits the absorption of vitamin D. However, without any protection from the sun, harsh UV rays can damage your cells. So Homo sapiens originated in Africa, where individuals with genetic mutations encoding dark skin are more likely to survive and reproduce. Thus, populations that originated near the equator, where the sun is harsh, have dark skin. So harsher suns allow you to, burn less when you have darker skin. Eventually, people started to migrate away from Africa north, where sunlight is more scarce, and in this environment, individuals with the mutation encoding light skin are more likely to survive and reproduce. Thus, populations that originated in cooler regions, where sunlight is limited, tend to have lighter skin. So lighter skin, northern regions, darker skin tend to be closer to the equator. And that's really just because of the environment that selected that skin color. Okay, so depending on where your ancestors, started to live, that's gonna have an indication on that skin color. So evolution over time, populations of the same species that are exposed to different environmental pressures can become so genetically different that they can no longer interbreed. That is, they diverge to become two separate species, and this process is called evolution. So imagine we were separated from, people, let's just say they say that all humans originated in Africa. So let's say that people came to Canada and then they've been separated from people in Africa for so long, they finally meet up with someone in Africa and they can't even mate with them because they have evolved differently. They've had different environments, they've had different foods, they have different predators, everything that has changed them to possibly be not able to interbreed. And I'm saying this, but this isn't actually true, but it is true in different species. And I know I don't know if it's going to talk about bird species. No, it's not. But it is later on. But generally that's the idea, is that maybe you were one species and then you were separated for so long geographically that you have become basically two different genetically different species that can't interbreed. You can't mate with each other. So evolution is a process by which new species come into being. Natural selection is the mechanism by which evolution occurs. Okay, so evolution in action, the Silver Fox experiment, I will post that on the Google Classroom, as well as this evidence of evolution video. But the general idea here is that the theory of evolution via natural selection explains a wide diversity of organisms we see today. The fossil record, patterns of distribution, comparative anatomy, embryology, and genetics all provide evidence in support of evolution. Okay, I'm going to stop there because that's going to go into all of those, and we'll pick up there on the next video.